Hey everyone, so we're going to dive into Bitcoin today and take a look at some of the shorter term price action, as I feel like I'm one of the only ones in this space that actually feels that we have a decent shot of hitting about $28,000 to $36,000 in the coming months. Whether that proves to be the low, I'm not exactly sure, but let me take you into some key reasons why I think that may happen. Drop me a comment down below with where you think crypto is headed in the next 6 to 12 months. Are you bullish? Are you bearish? Would love to know in the comment section below. Now, the first thing that I wanted to talk about before any price is sentiment, because sentiment is a really interesting thing to try to gauge, because you have the crypto fear and greed index, which gives you the general, how fearful and how greedy people are at a given time for Bitcoin. But we know that that can stay at elevated levels, during the peaks of bull runs, and during the depths of bear markets we can stay very low and people can stay very fearful for long periods of time. But what's interesting for me at this point in time, right, is Bitcoin is at a really interesting stage, because whenever I personally look at all of the YouTube channels, and I've been in the space for 5 years, right, and a lot of the Twitter discourse that I'm seeing online, is that it's a bit of a dangerous period at the minute for bears, in my opinion, because everyone seems to think that the only way that we're going to go from here is down, and no one is at least open to the possibility that a bottom may be in. And when people not only just think that things are going to go down, but they take it as a given, okay, that can be a very dangerous situation to be in. So that's why I wouldn't want to be caught short in this period of time and shorting Bitcoin, or thinking that Bitcoin is going to go down to lower prices in a straight line is like, staring at the sun. I don't think that you should do it for very long. But in the same way that up here at May 2021, if you look at this period of time when we're elevated about 63,000, what did you notice? Everyone literally only thought that this pattern was bullish and we were going to go higher, and it was only a matter of time before we go to 200, 300,000, $500,000, and it was basically how high was Bitcoin going to go, without any real regard that we may be in for due for some sort of correction. And people were basically getting any sort of fractal when they were thinking, right, because it went straight up in 2017, it has to do exactly the same in 2021. But obviously that was not the case. And at the minute I'm seeing very similar sentiments as well, but on the reverse side, where I'm very open to the possibility that we might hit 14,000, 13.8, or tap into some of these order blocks on a technical level. But when everyone is purely assuming that we only move down, it's a bit dangerous. So definitely something that I'm keeping an eye on, and I'm not banking that we go any lower from here as a certainty, at least. And that leads me on to the analysis of today's video to start with. And if we just drop this down to the 3-day chart, what can we see is that we spoke about this rising trend line since Bitcoin's inception, which is its main lower trend line that we've been on, and it's basically been about a 7-year trend line. So this is an area, in my opinion, that needs to be respected. You can see that we have seen support over here, and we are also at this order block, which is quite a significant order block at the old-time high. And if we don't hold 17,500, I think that we definitely go, down, tapping into some of these blocks of price action over here between 14,500 and at an absolute worst case scenario, in my opinion, the 10K level. But there's no guarantee of that, right? I remember, again, over here on the left hand side of the screen, that you can see when we were loitering at about $4,000 to $3,000. Okay, everyone was literally talking about how $1,500, $2,000 was pretty imminent. That never happened, and then we shot up to new all-time highs. So let's just be aware of that, okay? And recently Bitcoin has shown some strength in the market, where we've seen support at this level, at this order block. We're now starting to see if Bitcoin can actually make a little bit of a surge to the upside. And the two targets that I want you to have in mind are really $28,000 and $36,000, which are basically the two CME gaps that we've got, which is also in confluence with our 236 Fibonacci level, which is the level that we typically tend to tag, or the 382. And in bear markets, these are typically levels that we tend to hit, even when sentiment is very bearish. And just bear in mind that next week we have a CPI data coming out in the US for July the 13th, which will probably start to provide some volatility. And everyone is assuming that interest rates are just going to go higher, and that the worst is still yet to come, and that is most certainly priced into the market for sure. But if we get some sort of, you know, should we call it good news, or results are better than expected, and CPI comes out a little bit more favorable, and the S&P can make a bit of a rally, I definitely think that this is an area that we're looking at, okay? And, you know, like I've spoken before, that even when we move down in straight lines, we still will get some sort of reversion to the mean. So that might look something like this, where we maybe tap into this area. And just remember that sentiment can change so quickly, because if Bitcoin were to go to 28,000, 27,000 in the next 4 weeks, all of a sudden the shift changes. People are starting to get bullish. They're starting to look for bullish entries, and then it's the next target above that, and the next target above that. So just remember that things can change pretty quickly. So quite possible that we could do this, and maybe if we have quite a bullish uptrend in the next few months, we might come down, maybe retest some of these areas, and maybe even tap into about $36,000. That's the highest that I see Bitcoin moving in one fluid uptrending move before we get some sort of larger correction, because I'm still paying respect to the 4-year cycle, where even if we made it as high as $28,000 or $36,000, okay, that we can come down here and maybe, you know, tap into some lower prices later on in the year. And again, you know, just remember that smaller patterns form before all of the larger patterns on the chart. So let's just say something like that was to happen. Obviously, this is a little bit of speculation at the minute, but, you know, if we did do something like this, and we sort of loitered at this trend line, and that did prove to be the low at this major 7-year trend line, then, you know, maybe you get some kind of ascending triangle, and that's the pattern that starts to form, and that's really the accumulation at the bottom of this bear market. Could definitely be, okay? So, you know, we want to start to look at to see how these patterns are going to play. Caveat here is, if we break $17,500, it is likely, in my opinion, that we see from $17,500 a further downside of at least 25 to, you know, 40%, somewhere in that range. And remember that the longer that this pattern tends to play out, okay, so if we get some kind of consolidation or some sort of bear flag forming that takes about 2-3 months, okay, that you know, that is likely to you know, have a big spillover and a massive move to the downside if we break this, especially if we are not able to retrace to a very high level, because this is essentially shows that there's a lot of weakness in the market and we move lower. So the caveat is $17,500 has to hold. If we can hold this, okay, moving into the next like 1 or 2 months, I think there's a good shot that within that time we can probably tap into some of those gaps at 28,000 and 36,000. And guys, on the CME futures chart, show me one other indicator better than the CME futures, okay, that gives you a high and 100% almost degree of accuracy. You can't, okay? Because what I'm referring to here is that every single gap that has been created in the past 5 years, both to the upside and to the downside, has been filled at some moment in time. Yes, some of these gaps have taken a year or two to actually come back and fill, but we always go back and fill these gaps. You can see that if we just dive in here on the daily chart, look at some of these major gaps that we got over here, okay, at about 24,000. And that's why I said that a lot of these gaps are likely getting filled. There's a reason why we're seeing support here, okay? We've got order blocks, but we've also got gap fills, okay, which essentially is like you know, the market's way of repairing itself, okay? And when Bitcoin has made a 40% move, it's really important to note that when you get these significant gaps over here, okay, that, you know, there's a good chance that we come up and fill them, and we've done this every single time in the past. Look, every single time that we've had any kind of like down gap over here in COVID, okay, 8,000, we went down to 4,000, pretty quickly we came back and backfilled, okay? And you can see in that last parabolic move in the last bear market that all of these significant gaps, okay, upside and downside, all get filled, okay? So that's why it's another reason, especially given where we are in the current market cycle, that you need to be aware of this, okay? And it pretty much has a 100%, okay, you know, indication that we're going to fill pretty much all the gaps, and if history is any indication to go by, then we're going to go up and fill it. This gap is the only one that people can tell me that hasn't been filled. Okay, however, there's this $100 gap at about $9,700 back in August 2020. However, if you account for spread and you actually account for the significance of that gap, I consider that already filled and a non-issue. Okay, the most important ones are these big gaps that we're looking at over here. Okay, that will always tend to come and get filled, and you can see that the big gaps get respected as well, pretty well. So you can see that when you get these large gaps that we've highlighted over here, what do you notice? We get these massive wicks. Okay, look at this, and back in 2021 July, came back, filled this gap. Okay, big bounce. Okay, we have this gap over here that was on December the 20th. Okay, and then you can see that we filled that exactly to the T on May the 22nd. Okay, and we got a bounce. Okay, and then what do we get again here? The last significant gap, which is also in December 2020, and that's exactly the levels that we're bouncing from at the minute, which is, you know, showing us that we're seeing some strength. So that's why I think that you really need to respect the CME gap, and, you know, it's definitely something that we want to be keeping an eye on. Will say that I do think that most of the downside move has already been baked into the market, and if we do go any lower, I don't think that we go much lower than this based on the evidence that I can see in the chart. Okay, what I also remember in the last bear market, you know, just going back to that sentiment thing again, is what did we see in the last one? We saw interest rates were rising, we saw quantitative tightening running at the same time as well, and a lot of these market conditions, which, whilst I do think they do need to be respected, and, you know, there's this, oh, okay, maybe this time is different, oftentimes you need to rely on the indicators in the chart, which that's what they are there for, to be objective and to cut out the noise. So just bear that in mind. Sorry if you waited this long for the short term price action that I'm looking for on Bitcoin, but I've seen some people call this a descending triangle, something like this at the time earlier this week. I didn't see a descending triangle whatsoever, and if it was potentially forming a triangle, okay, a descending triangle, then it was way too preemptive, because a triangle, you want a little bit more touch points of data. If you saw something like this, fair enough, but we didn't even get anything as clean as that. Okay, so in my opinion, the pattern is actually still forming, and this could definitely be either an ABC, which may result in something like this. Okay, and we've already spoken about some of these Fibonacci targets up to about 25,000, 28,000. Could get something like this, potentially even a little bit more of a drawn out 1, deep 2, maybe we get a 3 up to about 28, and maybe we get a correction down to some of these lower levels, and maybe even one push up to about 34, 36,000 before we make another leg to the downside. Definitely a possibility. So that's what I'm looking out for, for Bitcoin in its move higher. If we can finish this week, okay, above the last 2 previous weeks, I think that is a really good sign for Bitcoin. So that level is 21,000. If we can finish at 21,000 or above, then I think that's a good bullish sign that on the weekly time frame, okay, we've seen nice support at this order block, okay, and now we're looking to use this support, and this candle gives you a little bit more indication and confirmation that we can challenge some of this void where we've got a lot of low volume, okay, for Bitcoin, where we basically slice straight down. So, you know, I expect us to basically give some of those gains to the downside back to the upside. Like I said, wouldn't be a surprise to me. Also importantly at these levels to note is the 200-week moving average, which we have never actually spent more than a few weeks down there, or a candle wick to the downside, before getting back above it. So as we've spent a week or 2 or 3 below it, we're now obviously basically back testing that 200-week moving average, which is coming in at about 22,500, which is pretty much the top of the weekly candle that we got this week. Okay, and we need to really clear above this as well next week and close. If we can get next week and close above 23,000, okay, I think that would be pretty good for Bitcoin and gives us a little bit more confirmation that we can move a bit higher. And then above that, we've also got the 200-day moving average, which proves to be systematically an area that we like to test in bear markets, and currently that's sitting in about 36,000. But this is obviously going to be downtrending as prices have been pretty suppressed in the last few weeks. So that's probably coming in at about $32,000. But both of these areas are likely to prove resistance. So if Bitcoin can clear this week and then we can make a bit of a push, I think that if we close and start to push into those 24,000 areas, okay, then we've probably consolidated enough at the bottom to start moving and challenging this order block above us that we moved down from and broke down from. So that's the other two main areas that I'm looking at, and you know, these are also in confluence with some of those Fibonacci targets that we spoke about as well. So those are some of the upside targets and some of the areas that we need to clear above us. But of course, if you just look left and you see what we did in the last consolidation pattern, you know, you have to say that it is very similar kind of range that we're in at the minute to what we were back in May. And what we did there is we basically sort of consolidated sideways after our major move down, okay, similar to what we've done over here. But what we did is we tried to make one failed attempt above, which is what we got back here on the 31st of May, and then we basically dumped eventually down to the next level. So if we do something similar to what we got back in May 2 months ago, then you know, just we want to look for this massive area. I think, you know, at 21,500 next week, that if Bitcoin does not manage to convincingly break through, then it is very likely that we can see something similar to this and continue to either consolidate in this range or even potentially move down to the next level if we break $17,500 that we spoke about. But if Bitcoin can get above that 200-week moving average at about $22,500 and start to show some momentum and some volume supported buying into that level, potentially as a catalyst, that CPI in July the 13th, okay, then like I said, we've probably got a decent shot, a decent possibility, in my opinion, to tag $28,000. And like I said, sentiment changes very, very quickly in crypto in particular. And if we reach those levels, people will automatically be talking about those levels that we're talking about now, which is $36,000. I am currently, personally, still holding the positions that I was in at 22.8, 20.2 thousand and $19,600 for Bitcoin that I accumulated on, and I'm also in another long position that my stop loss again is about $17,500. So I'm still willing to hold on to that, you know, still looking for some of those upside targets of about $28,000 where I'll look to offload some of those leveraged positions. So I hope you got some value from that video. I also want to let you know that we've got a video coming out in the next 2-3 days that I've been working on, which I think is going to be super useful for you, asking the question of, is Bitcoin in a generational buying opportunity? And I want to guide you through some of those, so stick around in the next you know, couple of days for that video to come out. In the meantime, if you like the video, and then if you want to keep up to date with all of my videos as well, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Peace out, catch you in the next one.